For example, dog breeders always encounter genetic limits when they intelligently attempt to create new breeds of dogs. Dogs may range in size from the Chihuahua to the Great Dane, but despite the best attempts of intelligent breeders, dogs always remain dogs. Likewise, despite the best efforts of intelligent scientists to manipulate fruit flies, their experiments have never turned out anything but more fruit flies, and usually crippled ones at that. This is especially significant because the short life of fruit flies allows scientists to test many generations of genetic variation in a short period of time. So microevolution within a type? Yes. Macroevolution across types? No. Most importantly, the comparison between natural selection and the artificial selection that breeders do is completely invalid. The biggest difference is the fact that artificial selection is intelligently guided, while natural selection is not. Artificial selection. Aim, or the end, is in view. The process is an intelligently guided process. Intelligent choice of breeds. The breeds are guarded from destructive processes. It preserves desired freaks. Continued interruptions to reach the desired goal. And the preferential survival. Natural selection has no aim or end in view. It's a blind process. There's no intelligent choice of breeds. The breeds are not guarded from destructive processes. It eliminates most freaks. No continued interruptions to reach any goal. And non-preferred survival. Confusing intelligent with non-intelligent processes is a common mistake of Darwinists. This was the case when I, Norm, debated humanist Paul Kurtz in 1986 on the topic of evolution. The debate, moderated by TV apologist John Ankerberg, produced this exchange regarding macroevolution. Geisler. Chandra Wickramancy, who is an atheist, said, "Believing that life came by chance is like believing that a Boeing 747 resulted from a tornado going through a junkyard. You have to have a lot of faith to believe that." Kurtz. Well, the Boeing 747 evolved. We can go back to the Wright brothers and see that first kind of airplane they created. Geisler. Created? Kurtz. Yes, but... Ankerberg. By intelligence or by chance? Laughter. Kurtz. There was a period of time in which these forms changed. Ankerberg. But didn't they create those airplanes using intelligence? Kurtz. I was using the analogy that Dr. Geisler was using. Geisler. Well, you're helping my argument. Laughter. You ought to drop that one and find another one. Kurtz. No, I think the point I make is a good one, because there have been changes from the simplest to the more complex airplanes. Geisler. Yes, but those changes were by intelligent intervention. Indeed, directional change in airplanes by intelligence proves nothing about the possibility of directional change in living things without intelligence. As we'll see in the next section, directional change in living things by natural selection has not been observed. And directional change in living things with intelligence hits genetic limits. So even when it is intelligently guided, evolution hits walls. In other words, even when scientists intelligently manipulate creatures with an end in mind, which is the antithesis of the blind Darwinian process, macroevolution still doesn't work. If intelligent scientists cannot break genetic barriers, why should we expect non-intelligent natural selection to do so? 2. Cyclical change. Not only are there genetic limits to change within types, but the change within types appears to be cyclical. In other words, changes are not directional toward the development of new life forms, as macroevolutionary theory requires, but they simply shift back and forth within a limited range. For example, Darwin's finches had varying beak sizes, which correlated with the weather. Larger beaks helped crack larger, harder seeds during droughts, and smaller beaks worked fine when wetter weather brought an abundance of smaller, softer seeds. When the weather became drier, the proportion of finches with larger beaks grew relative to the smaller-beaked finches. The proportion reversed itself following a sustained period of wet weather. Notice that no new life forms came into existence. They always remained finches. Only the relative proportion of existing large-beaked to small-beaked finches changed. Notice also that natural selection cannot explain how finches came into existence in the first place. In other words, natural selection may be able to explain the survival of a species, but it cannot explain the arrival of a species. 3. Irreducible complexity. In 1859, Charles Darwin wrote, "If it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed, which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down." We now know that there are many organs, systems, and processes in life that fit that description. One of those is the cell. In Darwin's day, the cell was a black box, a mysterious little part of life that no one could see into. But now that we have the ability to peer into the cell, we see that life at the molecular level is immeasurably more complex than Darwin ever dreamed. In fact, it is irreducibly complex. An irreducibly complex system is composed of several well-matched interacting parts that contribute to the basic function, wherein the removal of any one of the parts causes the system to effectively cease functioning. Those are the words of Michael Behe, professor of biochemistry at Lehigh University, who wrote the revolutionary book Darwin's Black Box: The Biochemical Challenge to Evolution. Behe's research verifies that living things are literally filled with molecular machines that perform the numerous functions of life. These molecular machines are irreducibly complex, meaning that all the parts of each machine must be completely formed in the right places, in the right sizes, in operating order at the same time for the machine to function. A car engine is an example of an irreducibly complex system. If a change is made in the size of the pistons, this would require simultaneous changes in the camshaft, block, cooling system, engine compartment, and other systems, or the new engine would not function. Behe shows that living things are irreducibly complex, just like a car engine. With painstaking detail, he shows that numerous functions in the body, such as blood clotting, cilia, cell propulsion organisms, and vision, require irreducibly complex systems that could not have developed in the gradual Darwinian fashion. Why? Because intermediates would be non-functional. As with the car engine, all the right parts must be in place in the right size at the same time for there to be any function at all. You can build an engine part by part, and that takes intelligence, but you can't drive to work with only a partial engine under the hood. Nor could you drive to work with one essential part of your engine were modified, but others were not. In the same way, living systems quickly would become non-functional if they were modified piece by piece. The degree of irreducible complexity in living things is mind-boggling. Recall that DNA's genetic alphabet consists of 4 letters, A, T, C, and G. Well, within each human cell, there are about 3,000 million pairs of those letters. Not only does your body have trillions of cells and make millions of new cells every second, but each cell is irreducibly complex and contains irreducibly complex subsystems. Behe's discoveries are fatal for Darwinism. Irreducible complexity means that new life cannot come into existence by the Darwinian method of slight, successive changes over a long period of time. Darwinism is akin to natural forces, without any intelligent help, producing a running car engine, like an amoeba, and then modifying that irreducibly complex engine into successive intermediate engines until those natural forces finally produce the space shuttle, a human being. Darwinists can't explain the source of the materials to make an engine, much less how any irreducibly complex engine came to be in the first place. Nor can they demonstrate the unintelligent process by which any engine has evolved into the space shuttle while providing propulsion at every intermediate step. This is evident from the complete absence of explanations from Darwinists for how irreducibly complex systems could arise gradually. Behe exposes the empty claims of Darwinists when he writes, "The idea of Darwinian molecular evolution is not based on science. There is no publication in the scientific literature, in journals or books, that describes how molecular evolution of any real, complex, biochemical system either did occur or even might have occurred. There are assertions that such evolution occurred, but absolutely none are supported by pertinent experiments or calculations. Since there is no authority on which to base claims of knowledge, it can truly be said that the assertion of Darwinian molecular evolution is merely bluster." The feeble attempts by Darwinists to deal with irreducible complexity reveal the magnitude of the problem for their theory. Darwinist Ken Miller has suggested that irreducible complexity isn't true because he can show that Behe's example of irreducible complexity, a mousetrap, isn't really irreducibly complex. According to Behe, all 5 parts of a traditional mousetrap need to be in place at the same time, in working order for the mousetrap to work. You can't catch mice with just a platform and a spring, for example. But Miller thinks he can disprove Behe's point by building a similar mousetrap with only 4 parts. Miller actually brought this up during a televised debate on PBS in the late 90s. But Miller's critique actually misses the mark. First, like a typical Darwinist, Miller ignores the fact that his mousetrap requires intelligence to build. Second, Behe is not saying you need 5 parts for any mousetrap, just for the traditional mousetrap. It turns out that Miller's mousetrap is not a physical precursor to Behe's traditional mousetrap. In other words, transforming Miller's mousetrap into Behe's would require more than one random, Darwinian, step. It would require the addition of another very specific part and several very specific adjustments to existing parts, and that requires intelligence. Third, even if those changes could somehow be made by mindless processes, the mousetrap would be non-functional during the transition period. But for Darwinism to be true, functionality must be maintained at all times because living things cannot survive if, say, their vital organs do not perform their usual function during slow trial-and-error Darwinian transitions. Finally, a mousetrap is only an illustration. Living systems are immeasurably more complex than a mousetrap. So Behe's point clearly has not been refuted by Miller, nor has it been refuted by any other Darwinist. During an intelligent design conference in July 2002, at which both Behe and I, Frank, were speakers, one particular Darwinist was a bit militant during the question and answer period of the lectures. I wanted to turn the tables and ask him a few questions, so I made it a point to sit next to him during lunch. "What do you do with Behe's irreducible complexity argument?" I asked between pizza slices. He rolled his eyes and said, "Oh, that's no big deal. There are biochemical scaffolds that are built around the system to allow it to evolve gradually." When I saw Behe later that day, I told him about the Darwinist explanation. He rightly pointed out that, number 1, there's no evidence for such scaffolds, and number 2, it actually complicates matters for Darwinists. Namely, if these scaffolds do exist, then who keeps building them in just the right places? That would require intelligence. Others have tried to find Darwinian paths around irreducible complexity, but all have failed. Behe confirms as much when he categorically states, "There is currently no experimental evidence to show that natural selection can get around irreducible complexity." Behe does not underestimate the implications of irreducible complexity and other discoveries regarding the complexity of life. He writes, "The result of these cumulative efforts to investigate the cell, to investigate life at the molecular level, is a loud, clear, piercing cry of design. The result is so unambiguous and so significant that it must be ranked as one of the greatest achievements in the history of science. The discovery rivals those of Newton and Einstein." 4. Non-viability of transitional forms. Another problem that plagues the plausibility of natural selection creating new life forms is the fact that transitional forms could not survive. For example, consider the Darwinian assertion that birds evolved gradually.